Hey, everybody. All right, this is the live that I have been getting requests for. So we are going to jump right into it. You want to save this one if you don't have time to sit and watch it now. This is definitely a keeper. So I'm Dr. Nicole, and tonight I'm going to be talking about healing your inner child. So, my whole thing is we're talking about boundaries. We're talking about healthy relationships. We're talking about, for the women, Salam, how are you? How to get the love that you know you want and you deserve. But we really have to backtrack, to the root of so much of what a lot of us deal with. And I did a live yesterday. I was talking about the different types of intimacy. And somebody was like, all right, can you please do one on healing your inner child? And I added the part about like how this is going to help you improve, like lead to the love that you really want. So many women, let me tell you this, so many women are struggling in this area. There's a whole lot of misinformation out on these internet streets, as well as not really helping women to really tap into themselves and do the healing that they know they need. Yes, thank you for joining. You said such a good topic. Yes. So I want to talk about some of the practical things that you need to think about to heal your inner child wounds. You probably have been hearing a lot about this, like, inner child work, inner work, self work, healing your wounds, healing your inner child wounds. You probably have heard all of this. And I've been in this field for a long time, y'all. I don't even want to say how many years. And we have always known that so much of what you see in people, as far as like where they have a pattern of not being able to get their relationships strong or not be able to have healthy interactions with people, things are a mess in their life, that it goes back so often to childhood. And it goes back to some of the experiences that many of us have had where we were hurt and we were wounded. That's why we say the inner child wound. We were hurt and wounded as a child, sometimes on purpose, but sometimes just due to circumstances in life. Right. So it could be because somebody, our caretakers who was supposed to, our parents basically, or whoever was raising us, abused us or neglected us. Right. Or it could be just due to circumstances. A lot of times, we say we have to forgive our parents because they did the best that they could with what they had. So it wasn't always a case of like abuse intentionally, but just circumstances that made it like that. Either way, when you're a child and you get hurt and you get wounded, it's something that stays with you, right, throughout your life. And you go into adulthood and you display or you kind of act out things where you got stuck. So if like the core of the abuse and things that you suffered were at age 5 or 6, there's parts of you when you're an adult that is still that little 5 or 6-year-old. There are parts of you that might still be that little 8 or 9-year-old when you were really hurt. There are parts of you that are wherever it was that you experienced the most pain and you were hurt and wounded the most as a child. Those things, if you never work them through, they are going to work, follow you throughout into adulthood. And that's why you might see in yourself, or you might see in a lot of people that you observe, like you feel like, wow, that person is kind of acting immature. Or you might look at yourself in the mirror and be like, I'm kind of acting in ways that don't match my real age. But you can't really figure out why, right? It's because you're really acting from the place of the hurt, wounded inner child, from that period where you were hurt the most or where you had the core wounding. Yes, somebody said that explains why no matter how much success I've achieved, I feel like a small child with certain family members. That explains it exactly, right? And that happens so much where a person, especially a woman, might have so much success in her life, like professionally or in school or in business. But then when it comes to how she deals with her emotions or how she is in relationships or how she is with, with the family members, that she's like a little child all over again, feeling hurt, feeling sad, feeling vulnerable, feeling like she doesn't know, unprotected, right? That's vulnerable. Feeling like nobody's there to really look out for her or protect her, right? So those are some of the signs that you still have like an unhealed inner child wound. And the reason we call it inner child is like there's a part of you that other people can't see. Like you might look at me like I'm a full grown woman, right? But there are parts of me, I'm just saying as an example, that if you look internally, might still be hurt, might still be that little 5 or 6 year old or that little 7 or 8 year old acting in ways where we're trying to get our needs met. So, that's the whole idea of the inner wound or the inner child wound, is that there's parts of you that other people have no clue that you're struggling in these ways with it. And so most people, if they've been through anything in life, like I see most of the people on this live are saying like, yes, I can relate to that. If you've been through any kind of trauma, either in your family, in your community, or, just like in your society, a lot of people I see on here said they were immigrants. So, you have gone through something or your family has gone through something. So most likely you do have an inner child wound that you need to heal. In many ways, we all do, right? We all do. So this is for anybody. I don't want anybody to feel like, oh, this doesn't apply to me, or like, I had a great childhood. There are all things that most of us have confronted or had to deal with that many of us haven't healed from. Like, unless you were somebody that just went to a lot of therapy, or you were, you had a lot of people to encourage you to do that self-work. A lot of people are just carrying around those hurts and those pains and those wounds from childhood. So I want to talk about, like, I didn't say all of that to make you feel hopeless, like, oh my gosh, like I'm never going to get rid of this. I want to talk about, like, what are some of the things that you can do? You hear me talk a lot about doing that self-work and doing that inner work. What are some of the things that you can actually do to start to make your inner child feel more safe? Start to make your inner child feel like she's being healed, and she's in a place where she can move on from the past and be in the present and look toward the future without feeling like, she's triggered all the time. So one of the most important things when we talk about healing your inner child is to acknowledge the pain, acknowledge the wound, acknowledge what happened and how it's affecting you. And I cannot tell you guys like how important of a step this is. Think about it for yourself, right? Or maybe for people that you know. How often do you see people who kind of are so cut off from their emotions, or they were able to get through life by being numb and cutting themselves off? In some ways that may have helped them at the time. Like, especially as a child, when you find yourself in a situation where you're helpless, where you're vulnerable, where you've been hurt, or your parents, the people who were taking care of you, didn't protect you, right? Like that happens a lot with sexual abuse, where somebody in the family has done it and nobody protected you as a child, right? In a way, to survive, part of what has happened is you had to learn, or the person had to learn, to cut themselves off from their feelings. So one of the most important things that you have to do as you start now to want to go on your healing journey is to acknowledge what happened. Acknowledge that there is a part of you that's still hurt, that's still that little scared, unprotected little girl, right? To acknowledge that there's a part of you that hurt part that's not healthy for your life right now, that maybe is messing up parts of your relationships, That's not letting you feel, as somebody wrote on the comment, not letting you feel like you can enjoy your success, because you feel survivor's guilt, like you feel like, well, why am I the one who's successful, right? You have to acknowledge that there's a part of you, quite frankly, that's not coping in healthy ways. Like doing this part is really where you sit and you stand in the mirror. As Michael Jackson said, look at the man in the mirror. This is the part where you look in the mirror and you ask yourself, like, what's going on with me? Are there ways where I am in pain, but I don't want to admit it? Are there ways where I'm acting in my relationships that aren't healthy? That's a whole other thing that we could get into, right? Like, what are some of the things? Because I see everybody on the internet and people are talking about how I hear a lot of women talking about men are horrible, they're not this and they're not that. But what we're not talking about is, why were you attracted to those kind of people in the first place? Like, what is that inner child wound that you were so attracted to somebody who was unhealthy in the first place, right? So there's a lot of inner work just with that first step of acknowledging that there are parts of you that are still hurt, unprotected, scared, and need to be healed. Yes, trauma bonds. And yes, mental health over stigma. You remember yesterday when I talked about emotional intimacy and how that's a risk factor for developing trauma bonds. But so many of us, we get so used to abuse, neglect, and mistreatment. We were primed for it because that's what happened to us when we were younger. So that's what we are. It's like a valence, like a sort of a magnet. That's what we get attracted to. We're kind of drawn to that unhealthiness, which can look like somebody being unavailable, but because that's what we were around, we feel like that's normal and we're attracted to it. It can look like chaos. I can't tell you how many women I've talked to who said a relationship felt boring because it was stable. There wasn't a bunch of arguing, cussing and fighting, distrust and looking through people's phones. And that felt oddly abnormal, right? So there's a whole way that when you go through different unhealthy situations as a child, you seek those out unconsciously when you're an adult. So acknowledging that there is the inner child that has to be healed. And I could say those words and I guarantee you the words don't capture it, right? It's easier said than done. But what it means is that you're preparing yourself for the journey. And you might even start by writing down like some of the things that happened and how when you think about it, you know that they're still affecting you now, right? You're acknowledging that those things did hurt then and they hurt now. This is often the hardest part, especially for women who were raised to be strong women, whether it's the strong Black woman or any other ethnicity or background where you're raised that you have to be strong. And so many people tell me, like, I don't have time to acknowledge stuff that happened in the past. I don't have time to think about who hurt me. I don't want to write this stuff down because it's going to hurt too bad. Right? Oops, sorry. These notifications. It's going to hurt so bad. But that is the very first and most important step that you have to go on. And once you do that courageous thing, because we always say do it scared, it will be so scary when you start to think about like opening that door to revisit the past. But once you do that, it's almost like the first step, the journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. That's what that is. So you take that step, you write down, and you prepare yourself mentally to acknowledge these things that happen. Okay? The second thing, once you do that, is you really start digging in, and we call it listening to your inner child. Your wounded inner child is usually, so there's different aspects of the inner child. There's a part of the inner child that we want to tap into because that's the joyful, carefree, in the moment, like I'm having fun and I don't have a care in the world. That's the inner child that we want to tap into, right? Because we know, like, my kids will tell me, Mommy, you're so boring. Because kids live, like, in a healthy way, they live for and in the moment. And we always want to be able to tap into some of that as adults, because that's where the joy, that's a very healthy thing. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But there's a part of the inner child, the hurt inner child, that you want to listen to. And usually that part, that hurt inner child, will talk in its own code language, her own code language. She'll speak through the body. She'll speak through emotions when you get triggered in situations that you are so surprised may trigger you, right? You ever find yourself in a situation where you go from like 0 to 50, like for no reason you get triggered? Maybe something that someone says, something that you watch, some way that a person treats you, and it really, like, you can sometimes feel it in the pit of your stomach, in your gut. That's called listening to your inner child, where you can listen to how you're affected by situations in the present that sort of take you back to the past. They make you feel like you're that, that scared, unprotected, vulnerable little girl again. So you want to listen to those things. You want to listen to your body. Like, when you're in situations, do you start to feel like something isn't right in your gut? Or do you start to get sweaty, or your heart is racing? All of those are signs of triggers and signs of what your inner child is trying to say that it needs. Like, sometimes your anger is a sign of communication from your inner child. I made a post today that was talking about how anger and resentment and all of those things are not, they shouldn't be happening all the time. You shouldn't be feeling those things all the time. And if you are, it's a sign that you have some work to do, that you need to figure out, like, what situations, what people, what feelings are taking you to that anger and that resentment. And that's going to be a sign. That's like your inner child communicating with you and saying, well, what I'm really angry about is the fact that people keep taking advantage of me. I don't know anything about boundaries. So people keep, piling things on with me because they think I'm so nice and they think I'm not going to say no. Or what I'm really mad or, triggered by is being attracted to unhealthy men, but feeling like I don't know how to get out of that pattern, right? So you have to really listen to what your feelings are saying and what your body is saying. And that's a communication from the wounded inner child in you. And I would guarantee, like, if you really want to start this work, you need to get your own little book, a little journal that's just for this. So I said, step 1, you're acknowledging, you're writing down some of the things that were hurtful to you and that have left an impact on you. Then you're writing down, you're starting to notice and listen to your inner child. What is being communicated through your reactions and your triggers in your body, as well as your emotions and even your thoughts. A lot of us have a lot of negative self-talk, like where we're just so down on ourselves and, oh, this is, everything you say, everything you do, you kind of are negative about it. So that's a sign right there that, it's okay. Sometimes we all go through periods where we might have some self-doubt and things like that. But if it's like an ongoing, persistent thing, that's a sign right there. That's a communication that your inner child is trying to communicate, like something about your self-esteem isn't right. You need to do some work around, feeling more confident, because as a child, maybe you were told that you weren't going to be anything, or you were always criticized or put down, right? So that's the second thing, listening, right? The third thing is you also want to talk. You want to start a dialogue. And this is where, like, if you look at this, journaling is a big part of this whole thing. I actually have a whole journaling course where I walk you through how to work on some of these past issues through different journaling exercises. But journaling is a big part of this, because part of what you're going to do is dialogue with that little girl. Like sometimes I'll tell my clients, take yourself back to who that 6-year-old person that you were, 6-year-old little, Keisha or whatever. And, whatever happened. You had to move on because that was life. You never got a chance to really process it or talk about it or even, make sense of it, right? Life had to continue. But if you were to go back and talk to little 6-year-old Keisha, what do you think she would say in her 6-year-old words, right? Like, what you have to kind of put yourself back to imagine yourself at that stage. And it'll be like, what do you think little Keisha would say to you, to big Keisha right now? What would she say that she needs? Or what would she tell you she's afraid of? Or what would she say she wishes somebody knew about her, right? So those are the things that when I talk about a dialogue, you really want to dig deep and get into the mind of like who you were at that stage when you experienced those painful experiences, right? So that's the dialogue part. The other thing, and all of that involves journaling. Okay, I need to take this battery out. Journaling. And it's interesting how you when you start to write these things, you will actually start to see that inner dialogue within yourself. And I always tell people, when you start journaling, don't think of it as like, how you see in the movies where those historical movies, they have those nice diaries and the people write with such beautiful handwriting and it's just telling about their life. No. This kind of inner child dialogue journaling is really just allowing yourself to write freely. You're not thinking about that somebody else is going to read it or like how it's going to sound. You're really trying to be free and authentic and let the feelings and the words, come out. So that's what that dialogue is about. Now, the other thing that's so important, the next thing is so we talked, a lot of this was like focusing on the past, dialoguing, acknowledging your pain, all of this, talking to your wounded inner child. You also want to develop a practice that's going to keep you focused in the present. And that's where meditation or mindfulness comes in. Practicing meditation is so powerful. Almost every live you might hear me talking about that, right? Because it really keeps you grounded in the present. Because sometimes when we start to go back to the past, it can feel so scary. And it will keep you grounded in the present. There is so much powerful research, but not even that, like just experience. When you talk to people who practice meditation regularly, they will talk about the calm. They will talk about the inner peace. And I'm talking about myself, right? I've been practicing meditation for more than 10 years. And I've been giving it to clients to help them for years and years, right? Somebody said I had to get past my perfectionistic tendencies. Yes, that is a sign of, the inner child wants to be, the wounded inner child wants to be perfect. Because as a child, when bad things happen to you, in the child's mind, they think it's them. They don't say in their mind, oh, well, my parents didn't know how to parent, or these people did bad things to me. They think, well, something was wrong with me, so that's why so-and-so did that to me. So part of what the wounded inner child does is tries to do everything perfectly, to prove. It's like this cycle throughout life where the wounded inner child is trying to prove, no, I'm good enough. I'm okay. Like, I'm going to do everything perfectly, so you'll see that I'm really a good girl. So yes, you're right. The perfectionistic tendencies are related to that. And then the meditation and the mindfulness are so powerful because they kind of just keep you in the moment. And you've heard me talk about, like, if you tell me in the chat, like, what kind of hobbies do you have? Whether it's exercise or reading or some kind of craft. When you do something and you really get into it, what do you notice? You probably notice that you don't have time to like really think about all of this stuff, like have unpleasant thoughts. You really focus on that one thing in the moment, and you probably feel better. So that's one of the ways that meditation can help you. Oh, you said Pilates. Yes. Pilates is so intense that you don't have time. Like, you're so focused on that thing. That's how I feel when I do my weight training. You don't have time to get caught up in, like, oh gosh, thinking about things that happen in the past or worrying about the future. You are so focused on, yes, those feel good chemicals, those endorphins, and just really being focused in the present moment. And it really changes your, like, the brain waves to more relaxing and calm brain waves. So that's one thing I recommend to everybody. 5 minutes of meditation, right? And then once you get to a point where you have acknowledged the past, you've started this process of listening to the wounded inner child, the wounded part of you. And that could be through your body, your emotions, your triggers, what you notice in your patterns. That's a key right there. Those patterns. Look, can we get real? When we start finding ourselves, why are we attracted over and over to the wrong kind of man? Why? Why are we attracted? Why? And then we want to sit and say, talk about how, people are this, you can't trust people, and this, and this. Right? That's a sign from the inner child that it's caught up in a cycle that has to stop through healing and acknowledging and seeing what the inner child needs. A lot of times we might be attracted to toxic people, or attracted to toxic partners because they might feel like that person offers some protection. And I know it sounds weird, right? Like, how is toxic going to be a protection? But really what it is sometimes toxic traits come out as the person seems so confident and, they're take charge. They're ready to lead, so to speak. So that meets the needs of that part of ourselves that like didn't feel protected or felt like vulnerable and felt scared and unsafe. So look at your patterns and look at what those are communicating to you. Right? And so you once you kind of start that process, you start your meditation. You also want to tap into, remember what I said earlier, that part of you that is the happy inner child, the joyful one. Like, there's a part of us that we all need to go back to, that part of our childhood where there were those moments of happiness. Those I think it's Pampers, those commercials where they're like, I'm a big kid now. And you see the little kid, walking with their Pampers, and those commercials, the kids look so cute, right? And you just see, like, part of why those commercials are so appealing is you just see the happiness and the joy in the moment. And you want to make sure, like, while especially you're doing all of this inner child work and working on yourself, that you don't get so caught up where you can't experience fun, right? Because you could also get into, as you said, heal, grow, love yourself. You said that you have those perfectionistic tendencies. You could get caught up in trying to be perfect in healing yourself, right? And that could be like its own, problem, where you're taking everything so deep and you're not allowing yourself to experience joy and have fun. A lot of people, women, I tell them, you have to schedule time for fun. You have to literally schedule time whether it's just something in a moment where you do something you enjoy. I love those adult coloring books. They really take you back to like that fun part. Like, who doesn't remember coloring as a child, right? So those kind of adult coloring books, taking a bubble bath and having fun, playing in the bubbles, putting on some fun pajamas and eating ice cream. Like, think of those little things that you could do that would bring you so much fun and joy in the moment. It's always important to, so many notifications. It's always important to make sure that those things are a part of your life. And the other thing you want to think about doing is, you have to be very intentional throughout this process. All right. You have to be intentional because when you're doing this work, it takes a lot of emotional energy. So you have to be intentional about upping your self-care, making sure that you are taking care of yourself, like getting enough rest and sleep, eating right, and making sure you move your body, doing things that show that you really, like, that's in a way, like, that's really what your inner child needs. We call it like reparenting, because a lot of the wounds from inner childhood were when some adult didn't do what they were supposed to do to care for us. And it gets to a point, I know you have all heard this, right? The hurt that happened to me is not my fault, but my healing is my responsibility, right? My healing is my responsibility. So it gets to a point where you really have to learn to care for and nourish and reparent yourself. Whoever didn't give it to you or whatever they did or didn't do, it comes to a certain point in your life right now where that can no longer be the excuse, right? Like, you really have to take that seriously and learning to heal yourself. And also being careful to, looking at the comment, you really want to, that's where self-care comes in. And I know if some people feel like, oh my God, self-care, we're just always talking about self-care, but self-care is so important because that is the key way that you learn to reparent yourself and start to heal yourself. What better way to show that you're worthy than to really take care of yourself, right? To really find yourself like, yes, I'm worth it to make sure I get good rest and I eat and I go and get massages, or I go and do my beauty treatments, or I make sure that I'm in shape, right? Like, all of these things that you do to become your best self, those are forms of self-care. Even investing in yourself, right? I'm giving you some tips now, but really a lot of this it's an investment. You have to invest in somebody that can guide you and help you along on this process, right? So that part about being intentional about it, not just one day, oh, I'm doing inner child work. You have to be intentional about it. We're coming up on 2022, ladies. It's time to, are you going to start this process or not? Right? Everybody probably has some inner child work that they have to do. So it's being intentional. And this is where the boundaries come in, right? One of the most important things you can do to on your journey to healing your inner child wounds is to start to learn to have healthier boundaries. That's the number one thing that the hurt inner child didn't have. They didn't have protection. They didn't have the ability to say no or to protect themselves. They didn't have the strength to stop people from whatever it is, that they did to hurt them. So having boundaries is it changes the whole narrative. It really is one of the most important healing tools. And you'll start to see people shift. When I work with people and they start to learn to say no, or they start to learn to say yes to themselves, it is it's a whole new world that opens up for them, right? So being intentional, having your boundaries, learning about boundaries, and also knowing that there are some people that are not going to go along for the journey, right? There are some people who are not going to be able to go along on the journey. Either they might take themselves out, because they're like, you know what? She is elevating too much and I'm not with it. Like it starts making them feel uncomfortable. You ever have that happen where somebody you that you like, maybe you all started here and you start going to the next level and it just makes them feel insecure or feel like you're just on a level that they're not ready for, right? So some people will take themselves out of the game when they start seeing you grow like that. But other people, you're going to have to be the one to take them out of your game because they're either toxic or they're keeping you stagnant. They're making you feel like, making you feel guilty for growing and changing. Has that happened to any of you? Like, what are some of the things? Oh, girl, you getting stuck up. Oh, you're better than all of us now. Or don't forget, sometimes people will throw shade in like undercover ways. Okay, I see you, all that growing. But it's kind of like said in a way that it has a little bit of shade to it where you're like, okay, they're not really happy for me. So there are some people that you're going to have to take out of your sphere of influence, right? Because either they're too toxic or negative, or they are stagnant and they're making, these are signs you feel guilty for doing good and doing better and growing then around that person, then that person is not really helping you to elevate, right? Also with the intentionality, it takes, like when it comes to relationships, a lot of us have to admit that we are addicted. That I see this all the time, women, a lot of women are addicted to unhealthy, toxic relationships. And it's not going to change until that acknowledgement happens, right? Think about it, right? Like think about some of the ways that we promote being addicted to toxic relationships. Ooh, yes, I love a bad boy. Ooh, so much swag, right? There's nothing wrong per se with swag, but it's like sometimes what we use to represent what swag is really toxic traits, right? But we're trying to put a nice cherry on it. We're trying to put a spin on it. And just because a person might be a good person out like to everybody else, it doesn't mean that that's a good person for you in a relationship. All right, I'm going to refer you back. I'm not going to repeat all of this. I'm going to refer you back to my other video, the 4 types of men to avoid if you want healthy relationships. And those types are some form of a toxic person within a relationship. And I think that's one of the key things that I'll leave you with this, that you have to learn to distinguish, right? Like just because a person looks nice outside of being in a relationship with them does not mean they're going to be healthy when you're in a relationship with them. Okay. So, you have to judge like what their actions are and their emotional sort of health, how healthy they are emotionally with you in a relationship, and not just judge it based on what they look like to everybody else. Right. So do you have any questions? Yes, I saw. I missed some of the comments. All right. Yes, sometimes people will ignore the successes you have. Yep, people will say you think you're all that. People will get offended. Yes. Somebody said, do you think I need to tell my mom? She's very sensitive and I feel like it would kill her, but sometimes I just want to say, Mom, I felt emotionally neglected. Yeah, I mean, you know what? Speaking your truth is always so powerful. And a lot of times we worry so much, we feel like we're going to crush a person. A lot of times that person already knows because the tension is there. And you can start with a letter. You can write a letter on behalf of your inner child to your mom or to whoever the person was, so you could get your thoughts out. And then you can decide if you want to give her that letter or if you want to share it with her. But, speaking your truth is one of the most important or healthy forms of healing yourself. Because if you think about it, like everything we said about the inner child is that part of yourself is unhealed because she didn't get to speak. She didn't get to she literally was silenced. That's part of the definition of being a wound, having an inner child wound. You were silenced. You couldn't speak up. Your parents were too caught up in chaos, or they were emotionally immature, or they neglected your emotional needs. They didn't understand your growth and development. Whatever it is, right? And I said in the beginning, it could be something totally unintentional where they, quote, were doing the best that they could do, but it doesn't mean that it didn't affect you. And I know so many of us, like, the mother is sacred. So we can't even think about criticizing our mothers. But you have to sometimes acknowledge what happened. And if you decide that you want to talk to her, you're coming from a place of just speaking your truth, explaining your experience, right? So, yes, too caught up. So somebody said too caught up in chaos and emotionally immature. Yes, those are signs that you want to think about with relationships. All that glitters is not gold. Sometimes the most charismatic man will be the worst man for you. And I'm not saying that there shouldn't be any chemistry, but some of us, we got to admit it. Like sometimes I look at the comments, like this whole idea, I like a bad boy. Well, okay, then don't complain when you get the bad boy treatment, right? Like at some point, we have to take that accountability for what we're allowing ourselves to get into. And like I said, there's always a period in life where you are not aware of your patterns because it's just what you know and what you're familiar with. And when you've experienced, for many people, if it's the kind of trauma you experience, it might set you on that path of repeating those patterns. But part of your healing is to recognize those patterns and then start to put a stop to them, right? And one of the biggest ways you can learn about how healthy you are is the kind of people you gravitate towards. So whether it's friendships or relationships, or, what are you gravitating to the drama? Or are you gravitating to something that might feel, a lot of times stability feels boring to people who are used to chaos. So you have to retrain yourself. And if you think about all the things I listed that are part of healing the inner child wound, those are all things that might seem boring, right? Like paying attention to your feelings, journaling, meditating, taking self-care. Like those don't sound like the most fun things to do, but believe me, those are the things that are going to set you on the path to have the most fun that you ever had in your life, right? Because we know that when you're healed and when you have grown so much that you're attracting what is positive and what is healthy, that is the real come up, right? Like that's the real flex. And those things are the real fun, right? We're looking for long-term fun, not short-term, satisfaction in the moment. Okay. So I am going to stop right here. I went over those steps and, we talked about how you really, it starts with looking in the mirror and stopping those patterns. Being aware of those patterns and then doing the work to interrupt them. So make sure you go to the link in my bio. I'm still on pre-orders. You can get it at a deep discount for my new ebook, The Boundaries to Bliss Blueprint for Women Who Are Ready Finally to Win at Love. I go through the different types of communication that you need in a thriving relationship, how to develop your self-love, the role that boundaries plays in all of this in a healthy relationship. And a lot of this inner child healing stuff, I go into what you need to do to really heal in a way that you attract healthy love, right? Because that's what it's all about, right? We don't want to attract, I think it's 2022. We don't want to attract what's not good for us, what's going to bring us down, and what might feel familiar, but that we know is unhealthy, right? We're trying to attract and elevate on a higher level. All right. So I hope this was helpful. Make sure, I think I got to most of the comments. Yes, you're welcome. I'm glad you enjoyed it. And hit the link in my bio. Pre-order your book now. You get all kinds of, you get more than $400 in bonus content when you pre-order now. Okay. So I will see you all tomorrow. You know, I'm doing 30 days of live, right? In December. So what? This is day 15. I will see you tomorrow with another amazing topic. All right. Take care, y'all.